same question all over and over again. I hate that.
So what's the one question that nobody has asked you that you want them to ask?
I don't want them to ask me anything. So don't ask me.
Oh, okay. So you'd rather not do the interview at all?
I'd rather not.
Huh.
The dark secrets of Mary J. Blige. You've never heard start with Diddy and end with Jay-Z. To the world, she was the queen of hip-hop soul, a once-in-a-generation voice, wrapped in power and platinum records.
There's only one Mary J. Blige. So they can run out and get how many girls, how many girl groups, and turn their hat backwards and fix their hair like mine, but they'll never be me.
But to those who truly knew her, she was a little girl from Yonkers, trying to survive her neighborhood, her family, and her own trauma.
I was mad at him, mad at everything, mad at the world, and you reach a point where it's like, nobody loves me.
Diddy gave her a platform.
Because he was a huge inspiration. When I came in the game, I didn't like myself, I didn't want success, I was afraid of it, but watching him, he wanted it so bad, and he was it.
Jay-Z gave her credibility, and in return, she gave them loyalty. Through every lawsuit, scandal, and rumor, Mary stayed visible, sometimes right next to them.
And Dame Dash wanted to try to get in touch with me. I knew Dame too, but he didn't have no information on me. And she said, he has this artist by the name of Jay-Z who wants you on a record. And I said, okay, let me go, see what's up. I went. They had the money in a brown paper bag, 10 grand. I said, thank you very much. I went in the booth, sang the song, was out.
She was there for the rise, and maybe the reckoning. Some say she saw it all. Others say she helped cover it up. And now fans are asking, was she ever really innocent? Mary Jane Blige was born on January 11, 1971, in the Fordham Hospital in the Bronx, New York. But it wasn't the Bronx that raised her, it was Yonkers. Specifically, the SCHLOBOHM housing projects, an aging concrete jungle that locals simply called SCHLOBOHM. The nickname wasn't cute, it was a warning. Gunshots echoed like doorbells. Domestic violence wasn't whispered about. It was screamed through paper-thin walls. And the only thing more common than a broken window was a broken spirit. Mary was raised by her mother, Cora Blige, a hardworking nurse with a powerful record collection. Cora was obsessed with the greats, Gladys Knight, Aretha Franklin, Chaka Khan. She'd blast their voices through cheap speakers, hoping their strength might rub off on her daughters. But Cora had her own demons. She drank to cope with the pain of a marriage that had imploded. Mary's father, Thomas Blige, had left when she was just 4 years old, a Vietnam veteran battling his own trauma. He was a jazz musician, but music couldn't keep him grounded. He'd pop in and out of their lives like a ghost, until one day, he just stopped coming.
I was mad at him, mad at everything, mad at the world, and you reach a point where it's like, nobody loves me.
At home, love was conditional. Affection was rare, but outside was worse. Mary would later say she never saw a woman in SCHLOBOHM who wasn't abused. She'd walk past women with black eyes, busted lips, sometimes barefoot, running out of apartments with shirts half torn, screaming for help, and no one came. It became normal, expected. And eventually, Mary stopped flinching when she heard screams at night. The trauma didn't wait for adulthood. At just 5 years old, Mary was assaulted at a family friend's house during a party, a moment that shattered her sense of safety before it ever had the chance to grow. When I was 5 years old, I was molested and just, I remember feeling, literally, right before it happened, I just could not believe that this person was going to do this to me, Blige explained. That thing followed me all my life, the shame of thinking my molestation was my fault. It led me to believe I wasn't worth anything. She kept it quiet for years, silenced by shame, buried under guilt, convinced it was somehow her fault. That secret metastasized, quietly growing into a lifelong wound. She began to believe she was worthless, that she had nothing to offer, that maybe she deserved the pain. Still, there was one place she felt safe: church. Mary found refuge in gospel choirs, where her voice started to crack through the pain. Singing became a way to exhale, a release valve for pressure she didn't know how to talk about. At school talent shows, she sang with her eyes closed, not because she was shy, but because it was the only way to disappear. When she was 7, she sang Reunited by Peaches and Herb at her elementary school. The crowd clapped, but Mary didn't feel joy. She felt exposed. As she got older, she built armor. Baggy jeans, Timbs, a hat turned backwards. She wasn't dressing like the R&B stars on TV. She was dressing for war.
Because when, I've been through so much as a child and a teenager, I just started to turn, not that I was a guy, I just wore baggier jeans and Timberlands and hat turned backwards so I won't, be so revealing. It took me a very long time to even wear makeup and tight clothes.
Every day she walked through the projects was a test. You had to look hard, sound hard, be hard. Otherwise, you got jumped, robbed, or worse. She fought often, with boys, with girls, even with her own family. It was survival, not rebellion. But even as the world hardened her, the music softened something inside.
Even as a little girl, I had insecurities, and I was always blue and always sad, but singing made me feel free. And that's what I had. That's what I held on to.
Mary would harmonize with her sister. She'd sit on the windowsill, humming through broken blinds, making lullabies out of sirens and chaos. She didn't dream of being famous. She dreamed of escaping. And in 1988, she'd unknowingly take the first step out. Not with a record deal, but with a karaoke booth in a Westchester mall. It was supposed to be nothing, just another hangout at the Galleria Mall in Westchester. Mary was 17, newly dropped out of high school, juggling call center shifts as a 411 operator, and doing what she could to outrun the shadows of her past. That day, someone dared her to try the mall's karaoke booth, a novelty tucked between food courts and kiosks. She hesitated, then stepped in. She picked Anita Baker's Caught Up in the Rapture, pressed record, and let go. Not because she thought anyone would hear it, but because she needed to. That recording, raw, aching, soulful, was never meant to go anywhere, but someone passed it to someone else. Eventually, it reached Jeff Redd, a rising artist at Uptown Records. And just like that, Mary's voice left the mall. It hit the ears of Andre Harrell, the founder of Uptown. And for the first time, someone in the industry didn't want to fix her. They wanted to feel her. Andre didn't hear polish. He didn't hear training. He heard pain. He heard a girl who had lived through something, who had earned her voice. She wasn't a diva, not in the traditional sense. She had no glam, no smiley interviews, no pedigree. What she had was truth, jagged and uncut. So Uptown gave her a shot. No big signing bonus, no celebration, just a chance. She joined the label's artist development pipeline, singing backup for Jeff Redd, doing features, learning the ropes. She was still living in the projects, still battling depression, still drinking, still partying, still ducking the trauma that trailed her like smoke. But now she was recording. In those early sessions, Mary didn't know how to act like a star, and she didn't pretend. She wore what she always wore, baggy jeans, Timberlands, backwards hats. She didn't sing above the pain, she sang through it. And that authenticity threw the entire label into confusion. Uptown wasn't sure how to sell her. She wasn't Whitney. She wasn't Janet. She wasn't what R&B had known. But someone else was watching. A new intern at the label. Ambitious, loud, and obsessed with building legends. Sean Puffy Combs. By the time Sean Puffy Combs officially stepped into Mary's orbit, the walls at Uptown Records were already vibrating with her voice. He'd been watching her from the sidelines. This quiet girl from Yonkers who refused to play by the rules, who didn't shrink or smile on cue, who sang like every note was pulled out of an old scar. Puffy was just an intern then, but even interns could see a storm coming. He approached Mary differently than others did. He didn't ask her to sing like someone else. He didn't try to wrap her in sequins or smooth her edges. He wanted her raw. He wanted the girl in Tim's, the one whose voice cracked because she meant it. Puffy believed that vulnerability wasn't a flaw. It was a weapon. And in Mary J. Blige, he found the perfect one. Together, they didn't just make songs. They made a genre. Puffy began producing tracks that fused R&B vocals with rugged hip-hop beats, heavy bass, snapping snares, street soul. Mary wasn't crooning over orchestras like the singers who came before her. She was singing over drum loops that rattled like gunfire in the projects she came from. Her voice wasn't clean. It was real. And that's what made it unstoppable. In 1992, What's the 411 dropped.
What's the 411, hon? What's the 411, hon?
The title was a nod to Mary's time as a 411 operator, her former job, and a symbol of how she'd always been the girl who listened before she spoke. But now, the world was listening to her. Tracks like You Remind Me and Real Love weren't just hits, they were declarations. This wasn't just R&B, this was hip-hop soul. And Mary J. Blige wasn't just a new voice, she was a movement. But behind the mic, she was still spiraling. The studio sessions were chaotic. Mary was drinking heavily, often recording through hangovers, sometimes breaking down mid-take. Puffy pushed her hard. He was relentless, demanding. But Mary, for all her pain, showed up. Every time. She poured her trauma into the tracks. The heartbreak, the self-hate, the shame she still carried from childhood. It was all there, tucked inside every verse. Fans didn't just hear the songs, they felt them. Mary was singing their pain too. Black girls who had never seen themselves in the polished perfection of pop stars finally had someone who sounded like them, hurt like them. And despite the chaos, What's the 411 sold over 3 million copies, rewriting the soundscape of 90s R&B. But success didn't soothe the wound. Behind the boards, Puffy was relentless. He pushed her hard, sometimes past the line. Sessions ran long. Mary often recorded while hungover or emotionally broken. But she kept showing up. And every time, she left a piece of herself on the track. Her trauma wasn't a backstory, it was the main ingredient. She'd escaped the projects, but not the chaos. The success didn't quiet the storm. It made it louder. She was drinking more, breaking down more. But she kept performing, kept recording. Because even as the pressure mounted, even as Puffy's career started to eclipse hers, the music was still her only weapon. By the time My Life came out in 1994, everything had changed. The songs were darker, the production was tighter, the pain was sharper. It wasn't just R&B anymore. It was therapy set to a beat. But as Mary's career grew, so did her dependence on Puffy's machine. And that dependency, according to some, came with a cost. In later years, Mary would hint at it. She said she was being controlled, that choices were made for her, that she was pushed into situations she didn't understand at the time. The comments were subtle, never specific. But looking back now, especially in light of the lawsuits piling up around Diddy, people are starting to reread those interviews in a very different way. Because the more powerful Puffy got, the more those around him seemed to fade into silence. And Mary J. Blige, the prodigy he once championed, may have become something else entirely. A puppet in a system she didn't build but couldn't escape. In 2024, Mary J. Blige's name re-entered headlines, but this time, it wasn't about music. A new lawsuit involving Sean Diddy Combs and a sexual assault allegation placed her at the scene of a disturbing incident. According to court documents, Blige was named as an attendee at a 2014 party in Las Vegas, where the assault allegedly occurred. There are no claims that Blige participated in or facilitated the incident. She was listed for presence only. But in a case this serious, presence alone has consequences. Her name now lives in legal documents alongside some of the darkest allegations against one of hip-hop's most powerful moguls. The backlash was swift. Critics argued that public figures like Blige, who built their legacies around strength, empowerment, and survival, had a responsibility to speak out or, at the very least, distance themselves from Diddy's legacy. Silence was no longer neutral. In the eyes of many, it was complicity. The media storm didn't end there. Almost immediately, journalists began revisiting old interviews where Mary spoke about feeling manipulated and pressured in her early career. Vague references to being pushed into rooms or doing things she wasn't ready for started to resurface online. At the time, they'd been brushed off as general industry struggle. Now, with lawsuits naming Diddy for organized sexual abuse and trafficking, those quotes hit differently. Adding more fuel, Blige became entangled in another legal battle. Diddy's ex-partner and longtime stylist, Misa Hilton, filed a $5 million lawsuit against her. Hilton accused Blige of interfering with a management deal involving rapper Vado, allegedly costing her millions. Though this case is unrelated to the Vegas incident, the timing couldn't have been worse. With Diddy under federal investigation and his entire circle under scrutiny, every name connected to him was being dissected, including Mary's. Again, she didn't respond publicly. No press statement, no Instagram clarification, nothing. And that silence was louder than any denial. Legal experts pointed out that being named in a civil suit doesn't mean guilt. But for a public figure who spent decades being seen as authentic and transparent, the absence of clarity felt like a betrayal to many fans. As lawsuits and public outrage began circling Diddy, Mary J. Blige didn't just face scrutiny for her history with him. Her ties to Jay-Z started raising just as many questions. Because the deeper people looked into the structure of the industry, the more they realized Mary wasn't just close to one empire. She had quietly played a key role in building two. Mary's connection to Jay-Z didn't begin with Roc Nation. It started long before that, in the early 90s, back when she was becoming the face of hip-hop soul and Diddy was still an intern at Uptown Records. She was already charting, already shaping culture. And Jay-Z? He was just another rapper from Brooklyn trying to find a lane. But even back then, Mary was in the middle of it all. The mutual link between Uptown, Bad Boy, and what would eventually become Rockefeller. Their first official collaboration came in 1996. Can't Knock the Hustle. Jay-Z's debut album, Reasonable Doubt, needed a strong launch. Mary was the one who gave it credibility. Her feature on the hook turned what could have been another underground rap record into a moment. She wasn't even supposed to be on the track. Her label pushed back. But she did it anyway.
And Dame Dash wanted to try to get in touch with me. I knew Dame too, but he didn't have no information on me. And she said, he has this artist by the name of Jay-Z who wants you on a record. And I said, okay, let me go, see what's up. I went. They had the money in a brown paper bag, 10 grand. I said, thank you very much. I went in the booth, sang the song, was out.
That moment solidified something between them. Something fans would later see play out in tour partnerships, public appearances, and strategic business alignments. Over the years, Jay-Z evolved from rapper to businessman, from Rockefeller to Roc Nation. And Mary was right there, co-headlining the Heart of the City tour in 2008, appearing at his title events, walking red carpets by his side. This wasn't just respect, it was reinforcement. Both brands were lifted every time they showed up together. But behind that image of mutual support, a harder question started forming. Why did Mary, someone who had publicly shared stories of being abused, manipulated, and controlled in her early career, never speak on the industry figures who enabled that environment? Because as the lawsuits piled up against Diddy, against Roc Nation associates, and even during whispers about Jay-Z himself, Mary remained silent. And that silence didn't sit right with everyone, especially in 2023, when Cassie filed a civil lawsuit against Diddy for abuse and trafficking. Just weeks earlier, Mary had stood on stage praising him during his Lifetime Achievement Award tribute at the BET Awards. Critics immediately clipped the footage and reposted it online, asking why a woman who'd spoken so openly about survival was still standing next to the very man being accused. But this wasn't the first time she'd stayed quiet when it counted. Mary has spoken about abuse, but she's never named names. She's said the industry hurt her, but never said who. And as more women come forward with specifics, her refusal to speak has started to feel like protection, not just of herself, but of the men at the top. Some fans defended her, saying it was survival, that Mary had already been through enough, that speaking out against Jay-Z or Diddy could end careers, especially for black women in their 40s and 50s. Others called it complicity. From What's the 411 to Rock Nation galas, Mary didn't just play the game, she mastered it. She stayed close to the right people. She endorsed power even when it got ugly. And as the lawsuits expanded to include people in Diddy's and Jay-Z's circles, her name continued to appear, not as a villain, but as someone who was always there. She wasn't a bystander. She was part of the structure, not as a co-conspirator, but as a bridge, a witness, the voice who helped make men like Jay-Z credible before the world saw their full reach. And now that the industry is being forced to answer for decades of silence, people are starting to ask whether Mary's silence was strategy or survival. And if Puffy and Jay-Z reshaped Mary J. Blige's image, it was Casey Haley who fractured her heart. The moment they were paired for their duet, I Don't Want to Do Anything on the What's the 411 remix album, fans noticed the tension, a raw electricity that sparked even through the speakers. At the time, Casey's group, Jodeci, was redefining male vulnerability in R&B. Boots, tattoos, gospel runs over street slang. Mary's pain met Casey's rasp in perfect harmony. But what felt like chemistry in the booth became volatility behind the scenes. Their relationship was intense from the start. Mary, still processing the trauma of her childhood and the sudden glare of fame, fell hard. KC, known for his wild energy, matched her in chaos. Together, they were passionate and combustible. Friends called them the Ike and Tina of the 90s. And while that comparison might have seemed flippant at first, it wasn't long before the headlines started catching up to the whispers.
He was abusive to her, right?
Yeah, she is. When I know when we was together, she was jumping on the floor like it was at KC, and it was room service bringing us food. And it was said that he was kind of fighting her around that time and stuff like that.
She took it all, she said. Every insult, every blow, every betrayal. Because despite the fame, despite the crowds screaming her name, she still didn't love herself. She thought she deserved it. She stayed, hoping he'd change, believing that this was the cost of being loved.
Because I felt like I'd rather stay and take a beating than to let him go. Because I felt like if I let him go, like I was going to die. You know that love where you feel like, gosh, I'll lose my mind if he leaves.
The relationship spiraled into a toxic pattern. There were good times, no doubt. Laughter, performances, the illusion of being music's hottest couple. But underneath, Mary was unraveling. The trauma she'd buried for years, the molestation, the abandonment, the addiction, all began to surface. She started drinking more, using more. The substances weren't about fun anymore. They were anesthesia. There's a story, never fully confirmed but whispered in industry circles, of a night in Atlanta. Mary, furious and drunk, allegedly burst into a party Casey was attending. She was barefoot, her hair disheveled, screaming. Puff had to pull her into a room to calm her down. That's where she was emotionally, spiraling, untethered and publicly unraveling, and still, somehow, performing through it all. Professionally, she was soaring. Real Love was a smash. You Remind Me had gone gold. She was becoming the queen of hip-hop soul in real time. But behind the curtain, Mary was a woman at war with herself, fighting to prove she was strong, even while being broken to pieces behind closed doors. The relationship with Casey would limp on, off and on, through most of the mid-90s. Mary later said the final straw wasn't a punch or a fight. It was an interview. In 1995, while in the UK, K-Psy was asked if he was marrying Mary. He laughed, shrugged, said no, said it wasn't serious. Mary was watching, and just like that, the fantasy shattered. She realized she'd been clinging to someone who never planned to hold her back. And worse, she'd built parts of her career around that illusion. But this chapter wasn't just about heartbreak. It was about the beginning of Mary confronting herself. The music started to shift. Her writing got darker. Her performances more raw. This wasn't "What's the 411?" Mary anymore. This was the My Life era. And what came next was the storm before the rebirth. Underneath the soulful vocals and lush sampling, it was a diary of depression, addiction, and untreated trauma. She was drinking heavily, not at parties, but alone. Cognac for breakfast, champagne in the studio. She'd bring entire bottles into interviews just to feel numb. And the drugs followed. Coke lines blurred with studio takes. There were sessions she couldn't even remember. During one particularly dark moment in her apartment, Mary later revealed, "The problem had snowballed into this thing that was bigger than me. It was bigger than me, and it was definitely going to kill me. So I was like, this is it, and let's go." And I remember sitting on my bed. I swear I don't know what death feels like, but I felt like my spirit was trying to leave my body. And I was crying, and I was going, "Please, God, no, not now. I don't want this." I prayed. Like I remember saying a prayer, I said, "God, send me someone to help me." While critics praised my life as one of the greatest R&B albums of all time, Mary J. Blige didn't see it that way. To her, it was a journal of pain. The lyrics weren't crafted to sound deep. They were raw reflections of what she was living through. On Be Happy, she sang, "How can I love somebody else if I can't love myself enough to know when it's time to let go?" That wasn't poetry. That was K-Psy. Their relationship had turned toxic. There were reports of physical abuse, constant arguments, deep insecurity. One of the most public betrayals came when K-Psy gave her a ring, then went on TV in the UK and told millions that they were never engaged. Mary didn't just feel humiliated. She felt erased. Everything she thought was real was suddenly turned into a spectacle. It was in that emotional wreckage that Kendu Isaacs appeared. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't a star. He was a manager working with Queen Latifah's team. Mary saw something different in him. Calm, composed. He made her feel grounded again, safe, and eventually seen. They started dating. Kendu helped her get clean. He stepped in as her manager. He helped rebuild what her previous relationship had broken. And for a while, it worked. Mary trusted him with her music, her brand, and her life. But years later, it all fell apart again. When she filed for divorce, Kendu demanded $130,000 a month in support, claiming he had no other income. Mary was devastated. She wasn't just heartbroken, she was broke. Yet she didn't stop. She toured, paid off her debts, released new music, and kept going. Because no matter how many times she was betrayed, Mary J. Blige never stopped rebuilding. Anyway, that's it for this video, folks. Bye.